Hello and welcome back to another episode of Preston Does a Podcast. Today's episode is episode number 6, and we're going to be doing a summary and analysis of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Okay, let's start with a little bit of background about this book. It was first published in 1988, written in Coelho's native Portuguese and published in Brazil. The book sold a singular copy in its first week and didn't sell its second copy for 6 months. And the person who went and bought that second copy was the person who bought the first. Due to the lack of sales, the publisher dropped Coelho and the story, leading him to have to go and find somebody else to publish the book. In the foreword to the 25th anniversary edition, Coelho tells us that no one seemed to notice when the book was published. Today, the book has found itself a much larger audience, being one of the most translated books by a living author, selling over 65 million copies worldwide. Let's go ahead and jump into the plot of this book. The story begins and we're following a boy by the name of Santiago. He's a shepherd in the Andalusian plains, which is the southernmost region of Spain, and he dreams of a treasure at the pyramids in Egypt. This dream prompts Santiago to find a gypsy who can interpret dreams. She confirms the location of the treasure and advises the boy to seek after it. She charges him only a tenth of the price of his treasure. Santiago leaves relieved that he didn't end up wasting his money on a dream interpretation. After his session of dream interpretation, Santiago returns to the streets and begins reading his book, where an old man begins to pester him. The boy initially thinks that the old man is maybe the husband of the gypsy who had interpreted his dream, trying to get more money out of him, but eventually he reveals himself to be the king of Salem. What I think is really interesting, and there's a lot of notes like this throughout the book, there's a lot of nods to biblical lore, and the king of Salem is one of many. So the king advises Santiago to seek after his personal legend, convincing him that it's within his best interest to go after this treasure. Santiago the next morning sells most of his herd. With the money from selling his sheep, Santiago makes his way to Africa. Once there, he's swindled out of all of his money by somebody who he trusts to be his friend, guiding him to the pyramids. Left with nothing, Santiago finds work with a crystal merchant, an old man who's given up on his own personal legend. Santiago revitalizes the business with his knowledge of omens and is able to help bring prosperous times to both the merchant and himself. After a year of saving money working at the crystal shop, Santiago decides to return to his sheep in the Andalusian plains. Before he does so, he speaks with the crystal merchant, who gives him his blessing to leave, although the crystal merchant does not believe that Santiago will go back to his sheep. He thinks that the boy will continue on to his personal legend, which of course he does. He takes all of his saved up money and he finds a caravan that's headed east to Egypt. There he meets an Englishman who's trying to study alchemy. The Englishman goes on to educate Santiago about alchemy. As the caravan travels east, there's war in the desert, and they're forced to stop at an oasis for the war to subside. Here, Santiago meets Fatima, the woman that he falls in love with. Here in the oasis, Santiago uses the power of omens to predict an oncoming attack on the oasis, which is forbidden by tribal laws. The oases are supposed to be safe spaces, and yet Santiago predicts that there's going to be an attack, and he goes to the chief of the oasis, and he warns him of the impending attack, saving the lives of many and earning himself respect among the men of the desert. While Santiago learns a great deal about alchemy from the Englishman, he ultimately ends up learning the most from the alchemist himself. The alchemist teaches him about the soul of the world, the unity of all things, and listening to his heart. The alchemist also guides Santiago to understand that the treasure that he seeks might be the journey and the wisdom gained along the way, and not just the physical treasure itself. With help from the alchemist, Santiago continues towards the pyramids. As they're traveling through the deserts, they're stopped by one of the warring tribes, who believe them to be spies from the other side. When confronted with the chief, the alchemist tells him that Santiago is an alchemist, and could level their camp by turning himself into the wind. The chief gives Santiago 3 days to turn himself into the wind, or he will be killed. On the third day, Santiago succeeds in turning himself to the wind. Santiago succeeds with help from the desert, the winds, the sun, and ultimately God himself. This shows that Santiago understands the universal language. Santiago and the alchemist are allowed to leave with their lives, and they continue towards the pyramids. Before reaching the pyramids, the alchemist turns back to leave Santiago to recognize his personal legend. Once at the spot where he's to find his treasure, Santiago is confronted by 2 thieves. They force him to continue digging for the treasure, and he ultimately finds nothing. In a moment of defeat, he tells the 2 thieves about his dream. One of the thieves turns and laughs at Santiago. He assures him that he will live, and then he tells him of a dream that he had. He says in that very spot, he dreamed of a treasure buried in a church where a shepherd and his sheep would rest for the night. This is the very church in which our story begins. In light of this new information, Santiago returns to the church and finds his treasure. He reminisces about his journey and the experiences that it brought him, and the things that he wouldn't have done had he just stayed a shepherd. Finally, He thinks of Fatima, the woman he loves, as the wind carries the smell of her perfume and a kiss from her lips. So there you have the summary of The Alchemist. In this book, there's two really prevalent themes that I want to talk about. The first one is personal legend. The book says that everybody has an obligation to pursue their personal legends, and that when those personal legends go unrealized, it causes the person a great deal of pain and suffering, something that Santiago witnesses multiple times, whether it be a baker at the beginning of the story who never realized his dream, or the crystal merchant himself, who never recognizes his dream of pilgrimage. Another big theme in this book is the unity of all things. In order to fulfill this personal legend, one must tap into the soul of the world, and therefore be able to communicate with the language without words, or in other words, what is sometimes called omens. This book takes a very pantheistic view where everything is united, everything that we see in the world is part of God. And in this way, when you reach into the soul of the world, you're able to communicate with all things and read the omens, which guide Santiago throughout the story. All right, with the themes out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the symbols. The first symbol is the sheep which Santiago guides around the plains in the beginning of the book. He's, of course, a shepherd, and he guides his sheep, and he talks about how his sheep rely on him. The sheep are a big factor in whether or not Santiago decides to go. He really doesn't want to leave them behind, and they represent a sort of comfort for Santiago, a life in which he knows and understands. Much in this way, other characters also have safety nets, such as the baker and his bakery, or the crystal merchant and his crystal shop. I believe it's Coelho's way of describing that everybody has things that they don't want to let go of in order to pursue their personal legends. Another very big symbol in this book is the desert. Santiago finds himself traveling the desert in pursuit of his personal legend, and I believe this is a metaphor for the difficulties of all of us pursuing our personal legends, the trials which we must face, the harsh conditions in which we may find ourselves. The desert also symbolizes how, if you know how to read the language of the world, you can find, even in the harshest conditions, life and nourishment. The oasis in which Santiago finds his love, Fatima, is also a pretty big symbol in the book. To me, it represents the same thing as the sheep. It's a safety net, a safe place that we don't like to leave behind. I feel like a lot of people, when they're pursuing challenging things, become comfortable. They become complacent. They find something that makes them comfortable, and it leads them to ignore their personal legends or the guidance from their heart. The biggest symbol in the book, in my opinion, is the transformation of lead to gold, as it directly compares to the transformation of ourselves. Lead turns to gold by following its personal legend, and we ourselves transform ourselves into a higher state when we pursue our personal legends. I believe this is analogous to personal growth as an alchemy of the soul. This book is very rich with philosophical undertones. In fact, I would almost say it's more of a philosophical story than anything else. There's a lot of religious undertones and a lot of religious imagery in this book, which I find very, very interesting. All of this comes together for a very spiritual and philosophical work, which has found itself spread throughout the world. One of the critiques about the book is the simplicity of its narrative. However, I almost think that should be considered a good thing about the book rather than a bad. I believe it's very reminiscent of stories from the Bible, or maybe even certain fables. I also think that contributes to the story's universal appeal. Many people find this book very accessible, and many people love this book, and I myself am one of them. It's inspired and informed a lot of my personal philosophy, just in terms of pursuing your personal legend and assuming that the entire world conspires to help you. I don't really know that I would say that that's true, but I think that there's a lot of power in the positivity that comes behind that message. This is a book that, if you know me, I might have offered to let you read, or I might have even just handed you a copy, which not uncommon to happen, but with this book specifically, I do like this one a lot, and I really do. I just think it's so accessible, and I think it's very easy for a lot of people to read and get a very positive message from. This book will have a place on my library shelf for as long as I live, and it's going to be one that I will continue to reread and check out. This book is not necessarily a particularly stunning literary feat, however, the story and the essence of the story is so strong and so universal that it's become a book we all know and love. So with that being said, it's the end of the episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think about The Alchemist. Have you read it? Have you not read it? Have you read it a couple of times? Has it inspired you in the way that it's inspired me? I've got all the links for all the social medias and even my email in the link tree down below. And with that being said, thank you guys for joining me for this summary and analysis of The Alchemist. Keep reading, keep asking questions, and have a great rest of your day.